Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's program, Essential Employee Considerations for the Return to Office. This event is part of the SHRM webcast series. You can learn about upcoming and on-demand programs from our e-newsletters and the webcast homepage at shrm.org/webcast. SHRM thanks today's sponsor, Appspace, for providing the support to make this program available to the HR community. And now a little about today's program. As workers become vaccinated, organizations must begin considering how they can bring employees back to the office in a safe and comfortable way. Today's program will explore return to office trends and communications and space considerations for the new way we work. To lead our discussion today, I'm pleased to welcome Sean McGowan, SHRM SCP. Mr. McGowan is the Vice President of People and Culture at Appspace. Mr. McGowan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Mike. We're very excited to be doing this presentation today in partnership with SHRM. I'm a longtime SHRM member. So on behalf of myself and my co-presenters, Thomas and Carolyn, who I'll introduce shortly, we're really looking forward to today's session. So today's presentation is going to focus on essential employee considerations as organizations look to return their employees to the office. As vaccine distributions increase, and companies must begin discussing not when, but how they'll begin to bring employees as well as customers and visitors into their offices in a way that keeps employees safe and informed. So today we're going to cover the following things. As Mike mentioned, we're going to talk about return to office trends that we're seeing from some of our Fortune 500 customers. We're going to talk about communication and space considerations for the new way that we will be working. We'll focus on the importance of a comprehensive communication strategy and what most feel is the new way of work, what we often are calling now or referring to as a hybrid workplace. And then we'll highlight some employee engagement best practices for returning to the office. Before we begin, just do some quick introductions, starting with myself since I have the mic. So I'm Sean McGowan. I run HR for Appspace. We're headquartered in Dallas. We're a communication and space management platform. Married with 4 kids, been in HR my entire career, too many years, I think, to mention. I was asked for a fun fact. So fun fact about myself is that I actually met my wife during a job interview. She applied internally for an HR role. Didn't report to me, but I was part of the interview team. And yes, she did get the position. Next, I'll introduce Thomas Philippart DeFoy, or TPDF, or just Thomas as we refer to him. Thomas is our Executive Vice President of Product Experience. In this capacity, Thomas works very closely with our customers, key enterprise customers, to understand their challenges and work closely with our product organization to create solutions. Thomas is also a member of the 4-Kid Club. He has twins as well, actually, as my wife and I do. And as Appspace goes, Thomas is ultimately winning the remote work game. Thomas is based in Costa Rica, where from inside his house, up on a mountain or a hill, he can look out left and look out to the right, and he can see the ocean from either side. Next is Carolyn Volkening. Carolyn is our Chief Content Officer. She's based in Las Vegas. Is our Chief Content Officer, Carolyn. Her focus is on communication solutions for the hybrid workplace and easy to implement strategies to create a positive workplace experience. You're not going to find Carolyn in the casinos, which is probably where I would be. Carolyn and her husband, a fun fact, they're currently customizing a cargo van into a mini RV. And I know they have many road trips and adventures that they are planning for later this year. So once again, we're all very excited to be here and spend this time with you. A little over a year ago, I was on spring break vacation with my family and 3 other families We were about to sit down and watch an NBA game. I know many were preparing for the upcoming March Madness tournament when all of a sudden the NBA game was canceled due to a player having COVID. Everyone left the arena. Approximately 30 minutes later, one of the wives that was with us, who's on the PTA school board, received an email saying that school was going to be canceled for 2 weeks, that the school district was going to have all kids stay home and be on quarantine. There's certain events that you remember exactly where you are or what you were doing. I remember that day very clearly, and certainly knew that things were about to change. So COVID has really brought about so many changes and considerations, as an HR professional for all of us. As cases continue to rise, businesses closed their doors, lockdowns and self-quarantine orders were put into effect, and almost overnight, organizations shifted to 100% remote. For my wife and I, and I'm sure many of you who can relate that have children, becoming essentially dual employed as an HR professional at a time like that, and a school teacher during this time was incredibly challenging. As we try to get our heads around things, we soon saw changes to the compliance and legal landscape. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or FFCRA, took effect April 1st, providing sick leave and extensions of FMLA. I can remember going into the office to post the FFCRA notice, which was the first time, frankly, I'd been in the office in quite some time, and wondering why I was actually going in to post it there when no one was in the office. Some companies, still needed employees to come in. There were new sets of challenges and issues around that many of us had to face. Can we make them come in? Can we mandate masks? Are we allowed to take their temperatures? What questions, can we ask them? We saw an increase in litigation claims. Individuals getting diagnosed with COVID and then maybe blaming their employer for making them come into the office. There were ADA and HIPAA concerns, regarding what you can or can't say or ask. We saw the CARES Act. We even saw recently with the American Rescue Plan Act. There's just constant things we have to be mindful of from a compliance and legal standpoint. As remote work became more the norm, many organizations had to address various processes and policies around different aspects of employment. How do we hire remotely? How do we verify someone's I-9? How do we conduct new hire orientation when we're used to doing it, face-to-face? What does this mean for internal relocation requests? What if an employee gets COVID? How do we handle that? Is that an OSHA log requirement? If the office could still be technically open, what's the process and procedure for coming to work? So a whole host of new operational day-to-day considerations for what quickly became the new business as usual. There's no secret that COVID hit certain industries very hard. Retail, entertainment, hospitality are a few that immediately come to mind. Many of you had to deal with, the necessary but unpleasant part sometimes of what we do in HR and helping your organizations weather the storm and make necessary adjustments to staffing and payroll, resulting in layoffs, furloughs, job sharing, for other measures such as compensation changes, freezes, and so forth. And then where it really got fun for us, in the midst of all the craziness, in the midst of managing all these different things that I just talked about, a big part, obviously, of what we do is helping to keep a positive culture, helping to keep employees engaged. And again, trying to do that in the midst of a very challenging environment and different landscape than we've ever experienced. This is even more challenging for some of you if your footprint is quite dispersed, such as Appspace is. We have 3 offices in the U.S. We have 4 offices internationally, and in total we have employees in 12 different countries around the world. One of the things that really helped me, and I'm fortunate, is the ability to use our platform for internal communications, the ability to reach people no matter where they are, to inform, to educate, to engage, whether that's pushing out company town halls, communicating, company priorities, announcing new hires, recognition, anniversaries, advertising open roles, pushing out policy updates, even engaging employees via surveys. And now that the fun's about to begin again. As vaccine distributions increase and we're able to get a grip on COVID, now the script is flipped, and the dialogue is now turning into how organizations will begin to bring employees back. Before I hand the mic over to Thomas, we have a quick poll that we would like you to complete. Let me just advance the slide. So there may be a little bit of a delay, but it should come up here shortly. This is the first of 3 polls. So we'd love to get your feedback, understand how many of you, if you do have a plan in place for returning to the office. I don't have any Jeopardy music to queue up right now, but I'll give everyone another 10 to 15 seconds, and then we'll advance it and display the results. All right, just a few more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and move us on and share the results so we can all get a point of view from the broader group. All right, great. So about 50-50, a little more than the majority, do currently have a plan in place. That's great. So whether you have a plan already or you are starting the discussion at your organization and working with your leadership and management team, I'm going to pass the mic over to Thomas, who's going to share insight into trends from Fortune 500 organizations. So from Costa Rica, I will hand the mic over to you, Thomas.
Thanks a lot, Sean, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to stick on this slide for a little longer before I move to the next slide, because I find it really interesting to see that around 50% of companies are still due to work on a return to the office plan. The last year has been challenging for us. It's been really going into 2 phases. The first part of the pandemic was focusing on helping organizations keep employees engaged and connected to the organization. But since December and things starting to settle a little bit, we've seen a higher demand from our customers to help them with the transition back to the office. And talking with those customers, I join weekly calls with a lot of our Fortune 500 customers. And the reason we're doing weekly calls is we're not done with the pandemic, and we're going to have to continue to adjust. And therefore, we need to really stay connected throughout the process. But the 2 things that really are common to every customers is they want to take the opportunity of this return to office to implement change. And we'll go into more details as to what those changes are. And the other is they don't want to make assumptions. They want to take data-driven decisions. And everything they're going to do for the foreseeable future is going to be based on gathering data and having that data available when a change needs to happen. So with this, I'm going to actually switch to the next slide and go through what are those changes that customers are seeing moving forward. And the first one is the workplace as we knew it before the pandemic probably needed a change regardless. And in fact, a lot of the companies in the tech industry or in the energy sector we're all agreeing that they had a plan to change the workplace, to move from this very static environment to something more dynamic. But the plan was a 5-year, 3 to 5 year plan. So they were planning on going slowly, implementing that change. They see the opportunity of the return to the office to accelerate that change. There's a good reason for that, from the safety and security and well-being of the employees. And therefore, a big focus of the return to the office is leading with change around the workplace environment to something much more dynamic. The second thing around change is it's not because you're changing the workplace that you can sacrifice the employee experience. So any change they're going to implement will need to have technology to support the experience. And a good example is if before the pandemic, I was sitting at the same desk every day of the week next to my colleagues. When I go back to the office and reserve a desk to come back, I want to make sure that I have the ability to search for where Sean or Caroline may be sitting and book a seat next to them. And that's really around maintaining the experience and making sure it's still a place where employees are excited to go back because they're going to have that opportunity to sit next to people they like to work with and share experiences. The third topic is collaboration. I remember my days in the office when I was not in Costa Rica. I would go to the office to do emails, to do calls. I was not necessarily going into the office to meet with people or have collaboration sessions. This is going to change. A lot of our customers have invested a lot in technology during the pandemic to allow employees to communicate from home using technologies like Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams. But as employees go back into the office, they're going to also accelerate the use of technology to make sure it's more of a collaborative space. Employees will go there for quality time, no longer to do emails. And therefore, it's really important to make sure the technology is set and the environment is set for that. The fourth pillar around change is empathy. And I think from the HR community, you're familiar with this. In the IT world, maybe not as much. And this is maybe an opportunity for us to make the workplace more centered around the employee and giving services that are needed. And I'll share an example. On the West Coast, a lot of the tech companies over there have invested in the workplace many years ago and transformed dramatically the workplace experience, delivering services to their employees, such as a gym, a nursery for the kids, restaurants, and a lot of other facilities. Inviting employees to return into those offices and not having those services available are not possible. This is part of the success of those companies in recruiting talent and maintaining talent. And therefore, the technology that will be implemented needs to support the ability for those services to reopen, not just the workplace for desks and meeting rooms, but also the ability to benefit from all the services. So change is the big opportunity for all of us as we return to the office, and change for a better is what we're looking to achieve here. Now, in order to do this, we need to have data. And so on the data side, this is what we're hearing. And again, this comes from a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, but also across industry and also from smaller organizations. Number one is health and safety. When you do an employee survey, you will realize that what most employees are most worried about going back to the office is health and safety. And it is the responsibility from the employer to guarantee that to employees. And for that, we're going to need to implement tools that allow us to mitigate risk. That starts with the ability, while the employee is still at home, to gather information on how the employee is doing, if the employee may have any symptoms, and why is the employee coming back to the office, what are they looking to achieve during their journey into the office. So a lot of the data here is even before you actually make it to the office. We want to make sure we gather that information. On a data point, planning is going to be important. We heard a lot of companies talk at the beginning of the pandemic about reducing real estate. And then as things start settling and we're really getting closer to the return to the office, a lot of companies actually went backwards and said, well, no, we're probably not going to reduce our real estate, but we are going to adapt the real estate. We probably don't need as many desks as we did before because we're going to move to more of a hoteling type environment. But because we're moving to a collaboration space, we're going to need more meeting rooms, more huddle spaces, and therefore there's a need for change there. Now, that change won't happen overnight. It's not going to be done before you return to the office. But once employees are into the office and we start capturing data around what spaces do employees search for first, we're then able to adjust the workplace and make sure the dimensions and segments support the employee's environment. So planning is going to be really important. And with planning comes flexibility. And that dynamic flexibility environment, that was not possible pre-pandemic. There were set meeting rooms with a certain level of equipment, set number of desks, and everyone would go to a specific desk. That needs to change. It needs to be very flexible, which means, for example, desks will look alike. And if I book a desk in the office, I probably will get to that guest desk. It will not have a lot of my personal item, my event badges from the last 10 years, my family pictures, or my preferred books are no longer going to be there. But this will allow me to sit next to a window one day and maybe next to the exit another day when I'm looking forward to running for a happy hour on Friday, for example. So flexibility will provide a lot of value. Finally, every customer, and that was consistent, they're looking to consolidate. The last 5 years have been about investing in technology left and right on users' devices and inside the workplace. And it's becoming really challenging for them to operate this at very large scale. And as we plan for the return to the office in an environment that is totally dynamic, it is important to consolidate the technology and consolidate it on two fronts: employee communication and the ability to manage your space. And the two are closely tied, as we will see from Caroline in a few minutes, around the communication strategy. So really, the last few months have been extremely interesting talking to those companies, because I think we're seeing that similar trend focused around change and data-driven decisions. And all of that under a single type of environment or platform that allows you to scale rapidly. The other thing that is important is timing. I mean, we thought last summer that we were going back into the office in December, and then we very quickly saw that was not going to happen. And a lot of companies started talking about a late 2021, early 2022. And actually, recently, we've been receiving calls from companies saying we're shooting for a return to the office around July timeframe, maybe even June 1st. So timing is important, and for that reason, the tools that companies will deploy will need to be easy to deploy at very large scale and very secure. So with this introduction on what customers are saying, before I pass it over to Caroline, I would like to run a little poll to get a little bit of your feeling on, or your trends on how you're planning that return to the office. And the next question is, does your return to office plan include a communication strategy? And for the 56% who replied that you have a plan in place, that might be an easy one to answer. For those who don't, maybe you've started with the communication strategy before you actually have the return to plan. So if you can take a few seconds to reply by yes or no to this question, this will help Caroline tee up her part of the presentation and make sure we help understand what the communication strategy could be. So we're going to let a few seconds go by, and then we'll switch to the next slide to get the results. As this is the second poll, I think you're all getting familiar with the technology, so we're probably not going to need that much time. So Caroline, I'm going to be ready to switch next, and I'm going to leave it to you. There we go.
All right. Excellent, excellent. That is actually great news. And hello, and thank you everyone for being here. But the fact that 75%, 3/4 of you who have a return to office plan have a communication strategy, which is vitally important. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the landscape that we're going into with the communication strategy and how you can create a comprehensive strategy for your workplace. So let's start with what every organization knows, right? At least conceptually, that communication is important for employee engagement and productivity, right? It's critical to building company culture. But still, you can look at study after study to see that employees report that their company doesn't communicate with them enough, right? And so on our end, we work with new customers. I work with them directly in an advisory capacity where we help them develop their internal communication strategy. And one of the questions we ask is whether they've surveyed their employees about communication and what they found. And time after time, what we hear is that their employees want more communication. And so that's our starting point, right? But then comes the pandemic, and all the change that Thomas just talked about. And so communication, which was really important already, becomes more critical than ever. So let's look at the current situation. And this is, there's a great article on the SHRM website recently that pointed out, they talked about a turnover tsunami and pointing out that more than half of employees surveyed in North America plan to look for a new job this year in 2021. And there's other research that shows that a quarter of workers plan to quit their jobs outright once the pandemic subsides. So you got to ask why. Well, some of it's pent-up demand. People who would normally have changed their jobs weren't able to do so during the pandemic. But knowing this is coming, we want to mitigate it, and let's look at the other reasons, the other stats about how people feel about the workplace experience. So the numbers aren't great through the pandemic. 46% of employees feel less connected to their company than they did before the pandemic. Right? 50% feel less connected to their colleagues, and 36% feel less positive about their careers. Right? And this one is one to really stop and consider that 42% say that their company culture has diminished. So even those companies with a strong culture going into the pandemic are starting to see it suffer. And you can think about it as social capital, right? That positive capital culture that you built up before the pandemic. We've been spending that social capital over the last 12 months of remote work, and we need to consciously make an effort to build that back up so people feel more connected to their company, their colleagues, and their careers so we can avoid the turnover tsunami. So coming to the return to the office phase, much of our social capital is spent. So, but on top of that, as Thomas also mentioned, employees are experiencing a lot of anxiety around return to the office. So in a survey done just last month, 42% of adults say they've experienced anxiety or depressive disorder over the last week. That's 42%. A full 78% of people of color express feeling anxious about returning to the workplace. And this is, of course, consistent with what we know about how people of color have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So we've got 2/3 of employees worried about health and safety returning to the office, and nearly that many are worried that their company won't adequately protect their health. Right? So that's the people side of the equation. That's what we're dealing with. Employees are generally feeling disconnected from the work experience and nervous about the transition in front of them. But then let's look at it from the employer's perspective. You need to account for not only how your employees are feeling, but the whole new slew of requirements and recommendations coming at you. And this slide shows just a handful of the CDC return to work recommendation for employers. You've got to think about how to adjust space, everything from moving spaces apart to cleaning the spaces to considering an entirely different ventilation for the building. Right? Serious considerations. You need to think about communicating with people around COVID-19. Are they experiencing symptoms? Are you conducting daily in-person or virtual health checks? Should you be staggering the makeup and the time of the employees are coming in and working? And then on top of that, under the communication here, it's thinking about visitors, thinking about people coming into the space. How do you communicate with them what the new rules are? So really the question is, you've got all the employee concerns, and you've got all these new safety concerns. So where do you go from here? And this is where I'll say, let's remember where we started. Right? Employees want more communication. I think we can all agree on that. They're tentative about their current commitment to the organization. They feel disconnected, but now they're about to walk into a space that looks different and has different rules than what they left. And this is where it's absolutely vital that organizations commit to a comprehensive communication strategy. So congratulations to the 75% that said you've had it, but let's look at really the fundamentals of what it takes to create a comprehensive communication strategy. And there are really 3 rules for every effective strategy. 1, be consistent. 2, keep it simple. And 3, keep it relevant. So first and foremost, an effective strategy is consistent in its message. The sure way to create confusion with all this change and to reinforce those feelings of disconnect that your employees are feeling is to be inconsistent in what you tell them. So, once you have a return to office plan, you're going to want to engage all of your communication stakeholders to make sure, 1, they know what the plan is, and 2, how it affects their teams. right? And here you want to think beyond just your corporate communications team and to expand it to every manager, every leader who communicates with groups of employees. Second, you're going to want to make sure that all of your messaging, regardless of who it's coming from, director of HR, the plant manager, or the team lead, is on brand. You know, the plan, the policy is official, even if it's evolving. So you want to build trust by presenting your plan as the official company line. And to that end, it's super important that your communication stakeholders have the right tools to easily deliver their messages in an effective but branded way. And this is where communication templates can be extremely helpful, we found with some customers, so that all messaging, you know, regardless of who it's coming from, carries the company brand and people know to trust it. You know, and finally, you're going to want to make sure that you're reaching everyone with your messages, regardless of where they are. You can be sure that every employee wants to know what's happening with return to office plans, regardless of where they spend their time. You know, because as part of the organization, if it affects their colleagues and their work patterns, it affects them. So think about reaching everyone, from the frontline worker who doesn't spend any appreciable time in the office, to the remote worker who doesn't live near an office, and to the person who can't wait to get back, you know, to being at the water cooler 5 days a week. Every member of your organization has a vested interest in your plan, you know, which is going to require you to think about your different audiences and make sure you have the tools to reach them, to go back to with the consistent branded messages. And so one other note about the everyone is to make sure you're thinking about the visitors to your space. You know, we saw in the CDC recommendations, and what Thomas is also hearing in his conversations with customers, is that you need to be thinking about how you're communicating and getting your message across to visitors to your office. So you have to communicate with them in a way you didn't need to before. All right, so rule number 2, keep it simple, and I'll leave it at that. I won't add more to it, but just keep it simple. So everyone has a day job, right? Creating and distributing and engaging with internal communications should be as easy and seamless as possible, so it shouldn't feel like a big effort and get in the way of what everyone else needs to do. Everyone wears so many hats today, especially in the people and culture field. So let's start with your employees and what does simple mean to them? It means reaching them where they live. So think about where your employees spend their time communicating with their colleagues. Do they use an enterprise messaging app like Slack or Teams? Do they utilize a desktop, or does most of their communication take place on a mobile device? Or are they essential workers who don't have any access to a desk or a mobile phone, you know, in which case their main method of receiving communications might be a digital sign? But wherever they live, that's where you want to reach your employees and visitors with the messaging. You want it to be a normal part of their day and interaction, like not an extra step or place they need to go. Because as we all know, unless a message is front and center, people aren't going to see it. And front and center is, of course, different for different audiences. So you want to think about that in developing your communication strategy. Okay, so the front and center idea, it makes it easy for everyone receiving the communication, but what about the communication stakeholders who have to get the messages out across all these different channels, right? They can seem daunting. And so this is where we like to talk about a command central. So as much as possible, you want to find a communication solution that lets your publishers work in one unified platform to distribute their messages. Because if people have to create separate messages for Slack, for Teams, for digital signage, for text messaging, for guest registration, for desk hoteling, for office access, I mean, the reality is that you may not have the resources, but even if you do, something is likely to slip. And this is where you actually end up sacrificing rule number 1 to be consistent. You know, the lift becomes unnecessarily heavy and complicated. So as you evaluate how to implement your comprehensive communication strategy, and all the strategy that we're talking about, look for a tool that keeps it simple for the people doing the work and communicating. So an example here that I think may resonate. So let's take the example of a mask mandate, where if there's a case where everyone needs to be reminded that a mask is required when they come to the office. So you don't want to have to create one message for the hybrid employees, another message for visitors, and another reminder for employees when they reserve a desk. Ideally, what you want to find is a unified platform that takes the single "a mask is required in this space" message and delivers it at the right time to the right people through the right channel. You want to create one message chair across multiple channels, and that way your message is consistent, and you've made it simple for both your communicators and for your audiences who are receiving this information. So the third and final point that's really fundamental to a comprehensive communication strategy is you got to keep it relevant, right? So how quickly do you tune out information that doesn't apply to you? Or look at it another way. How much do you rely on curated news feeds, streaming services for your own information? People want and expect information that's relevant to them. And employees are really no different. So one particular group that we mentioned that's worth calling out here is essential workers. Sometimes we call them deskless workers because they don't sit at a desk, or sometimes we refer to them as frontline workers. And their concerns and their risks with returning to work are going to be different than hybrid or remote employees. So they may work non-standard hours. You may need to reach them at different times. Maybe you need to consider communicating with these employees as shift changes, for instance. So, and additionally, the safety messaging for this group is likely different with different space or in the field requirements. So as you plan out your communication strategy, you're going to want to give special attention to the messaging to this group and make sure you have the proper tools to reach them and very specific content that they need in place. Then another way to slice and dice your audience is, of course, by location. While everyone needs to know your general return to office plan, you want to think about regional communication as well, because as we know, pandemic-related regulations and restrictions can vary sharply from location to location. And you want to make sure you align the right message with the right locations. And then it's also important to consider the special concerns for each group of employees. For those employees who are working remote or mostly remote, it's really going to be critical to not only make sure that you're providing messages that makes them feel part of the culture, that's rebuilding that social capital, as it were, but also that they have the tools to make them feel part of the office culture through seamless communication with in-office employees. And then finally, the last point is that it's important to think about the different teams that you have and how return to office affects each of them differently. You might have one team returning to the office, but another staying mostly remote, even at the same location. So you're going to want to make sure that you have plans in place that acknowledge kind of the hybrid teams within your hybrid workspace, right? And this comes back to the point we made earlier about leveraging your communication stakeholders, right? To get the right messaging out to these different teams, it's so important to provide the stakeholders with the right plan and tools to communicate properly. So in summary, what we really want you to take away from this communication strategy portion of the webinar is that one, it's never been more critical to have a comprehensive communication plan than it is right now as we all work out return to office plans. And two, that plan doesn't have to be a huge lift. I mean, in fact, it can be easy to implement with the right tools, right content, but no matter what, it should be consistent, simple, and relevant. So, all right, Sean, we will now turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. All right, well, now we're going to talk about some employee engagement best practices for returning to the office and return to work. This isn't really meant to be the official list, or these are just some key areas though that we felt important to highlight. So the first one is just listening. Listening to employees, getting the voice of employees, and then developing a plan based on that feedback. Now's the time, if you're beginning to make return to office plans for your organization, it's a critical time to reach out to your people and get feedback. Engaging in dialogue with your employees, does a few important things. Number one, you're going to get their ideas. You're going to hear, their concerns, what is on their mind. Which this is certainly something that is already on their mind. It's something that employees are definitely, thinking about and considering. But by asking their input, you can create a plan that will factor in their needs. Listening certainly builds trust. And and it will build buy-in, right, and commitment. So when employees know that their voice matters, they're going to be more likely to be engaged, and they're going to be more likely to commit to what that solution is, since they had a role in the process. It's also going to create a sense of team and community, which can really be helpful in a time like now, when folks have been remote for months or a year now, and in this sort of isolation that we've all been experiencing. So I think that's another important thing, is it can really create a sense of team and community. I mentioned earlier, with our platform, we're able to message our employees and survey them, and do pulse surveys and collect feedback that we're then able to consolidate, discuss internally with our culture team, with management, to really then create what our plan is and how we're going to move forward. The other one is safety. Obviously been mentioned a few times. We know that's going to be a huge concern of employees when they start thinking about coming back to a physical office. And the health and safety of the workforce should be top priority, really for any organization as they start to make this plan and bring people back and create some semblance of normal. Aside from it just being the right thing to do, from a business perspective, safeguarding their well-being is really paramount. Because no plan can really be successful, without employees and their health. Training employees on office protocols and procedures is going to be key. Really communicating clearly the messaging and that content. What will the protocols be around wearing masks, around social distancing, maybe limiting people right in conference rooms or in closed spaces or even elevators. Those are things that are going to need to be and possibly enforced when employees return. Organizations may implement things like temperature checks, not just for employees, but for visitors. That's another aspect to consider, is not just employees coming back, but how will the office now handle visitors, vendors, and so forth who are coming in to the building. What will that process look like for visitor registration or check-in procedures? Internally, we're able to leverage, our signage solution for communicating to employees in the office, via TV screens that are around the building, kiosk for visitor check-in, and desk reservation solutions for space management. Communication would obviously be the third, which seems really obvious, and it sort of is in a sense, but nothing ultimately speaks to employee engagement as much as communication. Communicating company mission and values. People know what the organization stands for. They know its purpose. They know, the foundations of the culture, goals, whether that's company, department, and team, or, even individual. People need to know, why they're there, how they fit in, how they're going to be measured and evaluated. And obviously just, communicating from the standpoint of just, creating that fun culture, that inclusive culture, helps build camaraderie, helps generate, personal connections with one another, and certainly helps keep people informed, right, of what's going on. So again, we're able to use our platform around communicating a variety of things, D&I initiatives, celebrating anniversaries and birthdays, promoting wellness. Was a recent campaign, we did with April being Stress Awareness Month. We had a series of communications that we pushed out. Once employees have returned, it will be, certainly important to continue communicating regularly, to continue to gather feedback, really have that, be a constant process and almost a loop, if you will. These, no matter how well any organization has planned, there's going to be unanticipated challenges that are going to emerge. And then the last one is just, taking it slow. Again, unprecedented times. It's going to be necessary to iterate and to adapt, as needed, based on, that continuous feedback from employees, and of course, working closely, with the business, with your leadership and your management teams. So one final slide, and then I believe we have one more poll. As you look to bring employees back and embark on this, return to office, it's important to remember, what it means for people, and really how it can mean different things and affect people in different ways. So really try to embrace, the whole person. This can obviously create a lot of stress. Some people may be dealing with, childcare. I know I have a 3.5-year-old golden retriever who sits by me every single day now. And so I wonder what that will be like when I start to go back to the office. The stress of leaving her, the stress of the interactions in the office. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. I have a family member who's got, compromised health. What does that mean then if I'm going to the office and interacting with other people, knowing that I'm, interacting frequently with that, very close loved one? Keep it simple. Communication is key, as we've talked about. Keep things as easy to navigate as possible. Another shameless plug around our platform that, just enables ease of communication, no matter, where employees are, no matter what office, no matter if they're remote, working from home. And when in a physical office, that does provide, a suite of space management tools to manage that physical workplace. Make it fun, make a game out of it. If you're, using a technology like that, we did something with our space reservation tool within the platform where we, gamified, made a scavenger hunt to get people comfortable with using the software, and had some fun with that, some contests and whatnot. Plan events, as you're able for people who are in the office. Have people share their experiences as well. We have employees that frequently post random contests, trivia games, and so forth on a pretty frequent basis. So I think that will take us now to our next poll. A little bit of a delay, but hopefully this will show here in just a second, if it's not already up. And so we wanted to get some feedback. This is the last poll, but just to get feedback to understand when are you planning to return to the office. So we've got 5 different options here. Q2.
I think we're having a technical difficulty, so we'll turn. So we've got the 5 different options here: Q2, April to June; Q3, July through September; Q4, October through December, not until next year, or no plans, we will be 100% remote. So you just take a minute and answer that, and then we'll advance it and see where we are. I think, as Thomas had mentioned, a lot of companies we saw thought they were going to be going back later, but now as things start to change, they're starting to go back, make decisions to go back a little earlier. So be curious to see what the trend is for this group. All right, I also have no Jeopardy music, but here we go. So when are you returning to the office? So what we're seeing is the vast majority here are targeting Q3. So we've got a little bit of time to, not a huge amount of time, but there's some time to get a plan in place then and to start some of the communication with your employees. Certainly time to look at it and see where you're going to be. All right, so in summary, what we really want you to take away from here is if you don't have a plan, there's still some time to develop a plan. And easy ways to do that. Start with identifying who are your stakeholders, who's involved in this. And we know this goes beyond just people in culture and HR. There are concerns with operations. There are concerns with IT. I think someone jumped us back here. So just think about, don't put this all on your own shoulders, right? Develop a plan, look at who else is involved, look at the different locations you have because they are going to require different approaches. No matter what, they may have different regulations, you may have a different population there. Another key point, make sure you're notifying employees well in advance, right? Give them opportunity to play with the new tech if you can, if you have new tech, to really drive the user adoption, and certainly let them know it's coming. And then transition slowly. If you can, start with going back a day a week, 2 days a week, parts of teams, certain teams. It certainly doesn't need to and shouldn't be an on-off switch here. Transition into it slowly, which also gives employees the time to adjust their lives and schedules because they've settled into last year to a different routine. And then finally, as we know, being here on a SHRM call, we're thinking about employees, so recognize that it's stressful for them. They've got to readjust to commuting, childcare, pets, as Sean mentioned. And people are just not used to the same social interaction. I've actually sat with people who have anxiety about being in groups again. And these are not anxious people. They're like, I'm afraid I forget how to talk to people. So just be aware of some of the personal stresses people have and anything we can do to support their mental health and well-being through this. And we really do that by having a plan and notifying and communicating with them. All right. So I believe we're going to go now. We'll let you know, you can always go to appspace.com to learn more about any of the solutions we've talked about here and find out certainly more about the company. And then, all right, I believe, Mike, is this where you are going to jump in?
This is where I'm going to jump in, and let me give folks just a little bit of information, and we'll turn over to the Q&A in just a moment.
Great, thank you.
SHRM thanks Appspace for sponsoring this program and SHRM's series of free webcasts for the HR community. Appspace can help you and your organization plan a safe return to the office. Appspace's unified platform helps create an exceptional collaborative workplace experience with simple communication and space management tools with features like digital signage, an easy-to-use employee app, room and desk reservation, visitor registration, and communications integrations. Employees can easily access all of the information and space management tools they need, whether they're at work, at home, or on the go. Appspace helps nearly 3,000 customers and many of the Fortune 500 deliver a modern workplace experience, unify brand culture, and enhance communications to keep teams big and small informed, engaged, and productive. You can learn more at appspace.com. All right, let's turn to questions in just a couple minutes we have left here. I think we'll start with a question for Mr. Philippe Partefeuille. You covered a lot here, the audience member writes, space considerations and communications considerations. How do you recommend that we as HR professionals manage both of these return to office initiatives?
It's a great question. I think the opportunity here is for you to engage with companies who have solutions in place that are already built for a safe return to the office. And that focus on really the three important pillars: awareness around employee communication and preparing your employee, education. We're going to have to train employees on how to return safely into the office and how to use the new tools that are implemented. And finally, delivering an experience in an employee app that your employees can use to reserve a space back into the office. I saw a lot of questions around, we've reopened the office, but employees are not coming back. I think it is the responsibility for the employer to make the workplace an exciting place to go back to. And I know that at Appspace, one thing that matters a lot is working with our coworkers and going to the office and sitting next to them And this ability that did not exist pre-pandemic is now available because of the technology. Be able to see who's coming into the office, where they're going to be sitting, what their agenda looks like, so you can actually map your return. We're, of course, available at Appspace to help you. We do this all day long, helping organizations plan for the return to the office, so please feel free to reach out for that.
And we'll conclude with a question here that came in for Ms. Volkening. Audience member asked, does messaging need to change depending on the audience in the workplace? For example, should I be communicating differently with frontline employees versus those behind the scenes?
Yeah, and the simple answer to that is yes and absolutely, right? There will be some messaging that is consistent across all, and that's where we certainly talk about you want to find a way to not have to repeat and be redundant about putting that in multiple channels. You want to be able to do it one and done if possible, but absolutely with different audiences, particularly frontline workers, they will have different concerns, and you will need to find different communication, different content to talk with them. We talk a lot about safety, and safety content for frontline workers is front and center. If you've got an employee out in the road, they're going to be experiencing something different, obviously, than someone sitting in the office. So, yes.
All right, thank you. With that question and answer, we're going to start bringing today's webcast to a close. Before we sign off, for the information and insight they provided today, SHRM thanks Sean McGowan, Carolyn Volkening, and Thomas Philippart-Defoy from Appspace. And we want to thank everybody in the audience for being online with us today and for choosing SHRM for HR webcast. That concludes today's program.